You can't throw a bloody rock without hitting one of them and it bouncing off and hitting a relative they're shagging.
Hello. Welcome back to Fallout 4. More specifically, Fallout London. Yes. In case you didn't see my community post, it's out. Although I'm sure that pretty much everybody around the world knows about it. It seems that the team's website has basically crashed, so it sounds like a lot of people are aware of it, and there's a lot of people actually downloading it, so... And it seems that GOG is able to handle the load, which is not surprising, but it's still good news, right? Still good news. So if you haven't got it yet, then this is your chance to get it. I'll put a link in the description to the GOG page for it. So you should be able to just download it straight away, it's free. But having said that, there are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind as you begin the game. There's been reports of a few crashes, which I've experienced myself, and I have worked out a few things that I'll share with you that hopefully will reduce the number of crashes that you experience. But there's no guaranteed way to make sure that you get 0 crashes, but there are things you can do to minimize how often it happens. Then we'll move on to how you should set up your character, because when you first begin the game, you don't have the information you need in order to make some of the choices that you get early on. You only get that information later on. So in order to avoid having to create multiple characters and learn through trial and error, let me share some of my tips based on my own trial and error. Then I'll cover some of the more interesting differences and some of the items that you should be looking out for in the world, because there are new recipes and there are new items that have been modified to actually be useful, and there are things like backpacks that you should be looking out for. And if you follow the tips that I'm sharing with you, you should get off to a really good start. Right, the game begins with you in some kind of incubation tube with a couple of scientists talking about you. Not to you, but about you, eh? Very rude. And yes, someone's fighting in your general direction. This is where you customize your character, starting with your appearance. You have pretty much all the same choices as you do with the base game, and you can kind of customize it as per the normal game as well. Then you have to actually choose your attributes. But the problem is that the game doesn't share what the perks are. Generally speaking, the perks are the same as those you see in the base game. There are a couple of differences, but generally speaking they're the same. I'll explain why I'm choosing these particular attributes once we get a look at the actual perk system. Then you get to choose 2 traits, basically like in New Vegas, right? Most of them tend to have a trade-off, so you get a benefit, but you surrender something else. So Acrobat lets you move faster, but at the cost of less carrying capacity. Chemhead lets you use chemicals for longer, but you suffer automatic withdrawal symptoms, right? Claustrophobic lets you be stronger outside, but weaker inside, indoors. 4 Eyes basically works like the New Vegas perk, so get a bonus to perception if you wear glasses, and a penalty if you don't. Gifted gives you a +1 to every attribute, but at the cost of experience. If you go for an Idiot Savant or a High Intelligence build, then you should be able to make up for that experience penalty, so Gifted actually is very nice. Heavy Handed lets you hit harder, but you can't use power attacks. This one combines pretty well with the new perk that allows you to swing faster. Order lets you carry more, but you can't move while you're over encumbered. I haven't tested it yet, but I believe that if you get some of the perks that allow you to fast travel while over encumbered, you should be able to bypass the penalty. But either way, you should only get this trait if you're an absolute kleptomaniac, like I tend to be in games. Kamikaze is for Bats players, because you get more AP refresh, but at the cost of taking more damage. So it's a bit of a glass cannon build. Night Owl I don't think is any good, but you do get a bonus to intelligence and perception during night, but a penalty during the day. Numbskull is really suitable for Idiot Savant builds. So basically you cap your intelligence to 3, but you get a bonus to strength, endurance and luck. So if you are planning to go for an Idiot Savant build, then this should be really useful. This one's the opposite of Chem Head, where if you don't actually use chems, then you get a bonus to strength and endurance. Sleepwalk was a bit of an interesting one. I've picked it in my build, but the one time I went to sleep, I ended up somewhere and I died immediately, so yeah, just be mindful that you may end up teleporting to some location where you can't survive, so may not be the best choice for your starting character, right? And as expected, everything goes to hell and you end up being released, because of course that happens. Once you leave the base and enter London proper, you're not coming back, so make sure that you take as many of the valuable items as you can. So over here is the first of the first aid kits. There's a second one later, but yes, make sure you take things like microscopes and stuff like that, things that are rare in the world. I don't know if the clothing that the scientists are wearing is actually useful, but you might as well take as much of it as you can, right? I don't believe you can get shot, but don't try to walk through the fire down the corridor, because you will die. There's a bit of a trick that there's doors on either side of the corridor, but you can't really see the other one. So you can come in here and get a few things. Now this is one of the unique things about Fallout London. Because it's set in London and the UK, there's a lot of tea-based stuff. So in this case, you can see that we've got tea bags, teapots and stuff like that. And skim milks, right? So you're supposed to have milk with your tea and everything like that. That t-shirt there has a GOG logo that you can wear in the game. And this terminal lists all the patrons that have contributed to the project. Right, now go to the opposite side of the corridor. Might be difficult to see, but there is a door there. This is a lab where they were doing experiments on shrews. There are a couple of bobby pin boxes in the lab, so you should make sure you pick up as many as you can. Right, in order to leave the room, you have to actually disable the lock system, which you do by this terminal. The logs give you a bit of history about some of the research that they were doing. And as you might expect, as soon as you release the locks, that of course releases all the shrews as well, right? So make sure that you hold tab down to leave the terminal ASAP once you release the locks. Because otherwise you're gonna get attacked by the shrews. The ones you meet here are actually pretty weak. The ones you meet in the world are a lot tougher. So just keep that in mind. And over in the next room is where you find the technical research lab. And there you go, right? Pick up the device. You see those Pip-Boys? Yeah, that's right. There's Pip-Boys. Then there's the Attaboy. This is Fallout London's version of the Pip-Boy. It's called the Attaboy. A-T-T-A, Attaboy. It actually looks really, really nice, I have to say. As far as I've seen, the game doesn't react to faction-specific clothing, so it doesn't look like there's any penalty for wearing the scientist's clothing. And that utility belt is what holds your Pip-Boy to your waist, of course. You can take it off if you want, but if you wear it, it does show the belt. And the Attaboy also has a light just like the Pip-Boy. You get exactly the same pattern of light from the Attaboy as you do with the Pip-Boy. So basically you get a sphere of light centered on you on a 360-degree basis. It is pretty bright, but later on you'll also find a torch that is more directional, and you can actually swap between the two at will. So if you equip the torch and light it, then you'll see that the pattern is more forward facing. From what I've seen, the torch actually lights further in the direction that you're facing, but of course you can't see all around you. While I was playing, I found that the torch was actually better for exploring, because you could see further. But when you're done exploring and you're now looting, I found that the Attaboy light was actually more handy then. So basically, use the torch for exploring, but use the Attaboy light for looting. And if you actually hack the terminal to your right, then you'll see the research notes from the person who created the Attaboy. Basically, you're holding the only prototype in the world. Most of the games in the mod are basically the same as the base game, but a lot of them have been renamed. So you may have to relearn some of the names, but most of them seem to be pretty much the same as far as effect. And over to your left, you'll see a second first aid kit in the tutorial area. Not quite sure what's going on with this agent, because she says that she's not long for the world, but you actually hear from her once you take the lift. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. And there's a second bobby pin box on the table to the left. Opposite that, there's a door which is expert locked, but it does suggest that we'll eventually be coming back here. Right, let's talk about why I chose the attributes that I did. One of the new perks in the mod is the Slayer perk that you access when you get to strength 10. That lets you swing faster. And as far as I've seen, there is actually a noticeable difference, both in first person and in third person. But on the other hand, unless you're really specializing in melee, it's probably not worth spending 10 strength. Unless you want the other benefits like the massive carry capacity, right? Generally speaking, I would say that most players should be going for strength 3 so you can access the armor perk and modify your armor, right? Although you can also go for strength 4 for blacksmith and strength 5 for heavy gunner. Under perception, rifleman 2 is probably the one you absolutely need, but you probably also want to get up to lockpicking 4. Demolition expert at perception 5 and night vision at perception 6 are pretty handy, but they're not that useful in the early game, so you can probably leave that off until later, right? Because you do have the option of training your attributes. In my case, I couldn't get up to perception 4 for lockpicking because I wanted those points in order to get Slayer. There's not much that's absolutely necessary under endurance, although if you do want a lot of hit points, you can choose to invest some points there. And under Charisma, I think the critical perk is Local Leader at Charisma 6, because the game does have settlements that you can take over, just like in the base game. Under Intelligence, I would say that Intelligence 3 is the bare minimum, because that gives you gun nuts. But if you are going to use Idiot Savant, then you want to keep your Intelligence lower. 3 is the minimum, but you could go up to 4 in order to get Hacker, right? And 6 gives you access to the Science perks. Stealth has always been pretty important for the single player games, so I would say that going for Ninja at Agility 7 is actually pretty important. Under Luck, Idiot Savant at Luck 5 is probably one of the critical perks, but if you are going for a VAT specialized build, then you probably want to get up to Luck 7 for Critical Banker, or at least Luck 6 for better criticals. In my case, I'll be investing a couple of points in Perception, just to get high enough to get Lockpicking. I might also invest another point in Intelligence to get Hacker, but that's probably not as important as Lockpicking. This is something a bit new. You can actually harvest clovers and consume them for extra luck. Make sure you thoroughly loot the place before you leave. Behind one of the counters, there's a pound coin. I'm not sure what it does, but it's gotta be useful, right? Make sure you go up the stairs and check both sides. And make sure to also take the lift to get upstairs. And as you can see once you get upstairs, the real life rat shrews are actually a lot tougher than the ones you met in the lab. There's a whole bunch of London specific decorations that have been added, like this lion head that you can see here. I don't know if there's a strength requirement to open this door, but I do have strength 10, so that may have happened automatically. If you can get in, this is where you find your first weapon, this knife. And I don't know why she makes that sound when she's stabbing. Yeah. I can only imagine what the voice recording session would have sounded like. And yes, just because somebody tells you to do something doesn't mean you should do it, eh? And we can also check out the cooking recipes at this stove. One of the first things that stands out is that you can actually cook milk in order to reduce your rads. That's pretty big actually. That gives you about half the reduction of a radaway. And presumably milk is a lot easier to access than radaways, right? So, although we may have to get a settlement or two in order to get a reliable source of milk. There's a whole bunch of new foods that are more London specific, like say jellied leeches, which I think are a substitute for jellied eels. But another food that stands out is the apple sauce. That gives you a 2% XP bonus, and based on my testing, it seems to go for about an hour and a half. And while we're talking about XP bonuses, you should also pick up all the cigarettes that you see. You can actually consume them to get a 5% XP boost for about an hour. And there's a bit of a nifty feature that allows you to actually see your character smoking them. So each time you consume a cigarette, that creates an apparel called cigarette. And you can equip that, and for a little while, your character will be smoking a cigarette. The apparel doesn't make any difference other than, being apparel, but the bonus for the cigarettes under raid goes for about an hour. Expired cigarettes are basically the same cigarettes that you see in the base game. In other words, they're junk. But yes, make sure that you do pick up all the cigarettes that you see. There are also cards that come as part of unopened cigarette packs. I'm not sure what benefit you get from them, but they are collectibles, right? So the hotel connected to an underground station, and you want to make sure that you loot all the shops. There's some useful stuff. Not game breaking, but still useful. Yep, those rat shrews borrow. That's right. If you're annoyed by the mole rats, well, they're back. That's a consumable cigarette. And also, yes, make sure to pick up the magazine next to this corpse. The train maps are just junk, but the tickets are actually currency. So the game doesn't use caps, instead it uses tickets. So make sure you pick up every single ticket that you see here. This is useful. A lot of the food in the mod has actually been modified to be London-centric, right? So those are chewing gums, basically. And in order to enter the station, you can't jump over, you have to actually spend the ticket. There's an invisible wall that prevents you from actually jumping over, so there's no way to enter or leave without using a ticket. And make sure to take the bobby pin box behind the counter. Right next to that informational kiosk, there should be a locked door that will take you to an underground area. Make sure you loot that place because there's a lot of tickets down there. And on top of one of the bins, there's a collectible card there. But aside from that, there's not much else going on, so it's time to leave the station. There's nothing to loot, but once you take the train, that will start the game proper. Now, a lot of people have been reporting constant crashes once they leave the station. You probably didn't experience any crashes during the earlier sections, but if you are starting to experience crashes here, then one solution that has been put forward that seems to have worked for at least a lot of people, didn't work for me but many other people seem to have got some success with it, is to install a mod. I'll put a link in the description, but for those people that it works for, it seems that it really works well. In my case, the crashes didn't happen constantly, right? Generally speaking, they tended to happen in places that were really busy. So I strongly suspect that the issue is performance based. So in other words, the mod's trying to load so many things and have so many things happening that it may make the game unstable for some people. In my case, I found that reducing some of their settings, especially the shadow related settings, made the game perform a lot better. But at the same time, let me also give you a few tips that should allow you to recover should the game start to crash constantly. I've had several cases where an autosave happened at a point where if you tried to load into it, the game would instantly crash. And the only solution that I found was to revert to a previous save. So one piece of advice that I would have for people out there is, when you do save in an interior space as opposed to the open world. Because when you load in, there aren't that many things for the game to load, so the chances of actually crashing on load are minimized. It also seems to be a good idea to avoid sprinting in busy spaces. So if there's a lot of things going on in a particular location, try not to sprint. And a third bit of advice is related to the first, and I would advise people not to play on survival mode. Because you want to save regularly and you want full saves, right? Don't rely on the autosave, make sure that you're regularly doing full saves. I'm playing the mod on normal, but I found that the game is a little bit more difficult than normal for the base game. So if you play on hard, it should still be a decent challenge, right? But the key is to make sure that you're saving regularly, saving in interior spaces and making full saves. That way, if a save does go crazy and becomes unusable, then you can always revert back to something which is not too far back. Another situation where I found the game kind of soft locking is when you start a conversation with somebody, but you move away from them. The mod doesn't automatically cancel those conversations, it still thinks that you're talking to them. But there is a point between when you start talking to an NPC and you get the dialogue box popping up where you can actually move away. So there is a small pause between those two things happening, and during that pause you can actually move away. But the mod thinks you're still talking to that person. And it is possible to begin a second conversation, and I found that should the first NPC that you're talking to then get close to you, that will actually soft lock the game. So in order to avoid that, whenever you talk to an NPC, just wait a couple of seconds before you move away from them. That way you can see if the line the NPC just gave you is the start of a conversation, or if it's one of those throwaway lines of flavor dialogue. You should be aware that the mod does have attribute and perk based dialogue choices. So in this case, because I'm a dumbass, I don't have enough intelligence to actually heal this guy. So I guess we lose an NPC? So we can't save him, but he does have a decent gun that we can take. And this is one of those custom weapons that the mod has included. It looks like it's the mod's version of the pipe weapons. Now I don't know if there are consequences to this further down the line, but one of the factions requests that you take care of a scout from a different faction. But if you're strong enough, you get the dialogue option to tell them to just leave. I don't know if there are consequences after this, or if it's just one of those attribute-based dialogue choices, but there may well be consequences down the line from me letting this person go. It'd be nice if there was something interesting, but this whole encounter has something of a choice kind of smell to it.
Legend!
So aside from the main quest you get from the faction boss, there'll also be side quests that you get from these members. And eventually you'll get the option to join them. But in my case I decided to forego that for the time being, just because it does tie you into a faction, and we haven't yet met any of the other factions properly, right? Aside from killing them, of course. But I get the impression that you are supposed to choose a faction. There's also a lot of flavor text in notes and terminal entries that you find, and that gives you a lot of backstory into what was happening before, like for example the government banning certain books, right? And you can see the reaction from the librarian to that. While you're doing those early quests for the Vagabond faction, make sure to also check out this electronics store. If you look behind the counter, you'll see a backpack. That expands your carrying capacity. It's under apparel, and if you look at your carrying capacity before and after, you'll notice that it expands by 45. So what are my first impressions of the mod? Well, my conclusion would be that this mod is basically Fallout 4.5. It is still Fallout 4 at its base, but it is so much more than that. Both from the gameplay perspective, just because it includes a lot of mods that enhance and extend Fallout 4's base gameplay, but at the same time it is still Fallout 4, right? So I would call it Fallout 4.5. Not yet Fallout 5, but Fallout 4.5. The city building that they've done is amazing. The amount of work that they must have put in is out of this world. Just walking through a city gives you a completely different feel than you had based on Boston. The city itself is fairly easy to navigate, so you can generally follow the main roads without getting too lost, but you should also explore some of the small alleyways just because you can find interesting and unique things. And while you're walking around, make sure you look at the signs for the shops and stuff like that. The amount of work that they must have put into that is out of this world. The voice work, like I said before, is top notch. This is professional level stuff. Quality wise, it's basically a AAA game. I haven't yet come across all the unique items that they've added, but from what I've seen so far, there are some items that have been borrowed from the base game. Like for example, hooligans are basically raiders, and hooligan gear is basically raider gear. But a lot of the weapons that you see are brand new and custom made. Basically, it does feel like a completely new game in that sense. This uniqueness also extends to the radio stations. You get 3 of them. One of them is basically the classic station, but with custom commentary.
Who says classical music cannot be fun? Enjoy this favorite of concertos and rhapsodies alike. Here is Franz Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2.
Welcome to Crystal Palace Radio.
dirty in other
I'm
ways.
Artful Roger.
And I'm Olivia Twist, playing those delightful classics from the other side of the pond.
The second one is an echo of the jazzy channel you find in the main game. And the last one seems to be a bit of a pirate station, and it seems that the songs are custom made as well. So even the songs in that radio station seem to be unique. Although I won't be including too many of them, just in case they do get copyright struck. But basically the mod has gone as far as creating radio stations that sound uniquely London based. And lastly, I'm not sure how common this will be, but one of the sections has you going through an underground area which is quite dark and has quite a lot of horror vibes to it, and you can't really see much. Whoever designed this section made really good use of darkness. It was very nicely put together, had a lot of horror vibes. So my overall impression after playing through a significant part of the early game is that this is basically a AAA professional effort. The voice work in particular stands out. The quality of the lore in the way the environment, the buildings, the signs, all of that stuff has been put together, the unique items, all of that gives it a definite different feel to the base game. There are some stability issues, but generally speaking they seem to be performance based. So as long as you keep in mind some of the tips that I gave you earlier, you should be good to go. Yes, you may experience a crash or two, but is that any different to the base Fallout 4 game? At least in my experience. I can't speak for the other people out there. As far as I'm concerned, I would thoroughly recommend that anybody who likes Fallout games to get a hold of this and play it. If you don't already have Fallout 4 on Steam, then this is a good chance to get it, because the mod was designed to work with the GOG version. It is still supposed to work with the Steam version, but with the GOG version it's more guaranteed. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.